Hello and welcome to Worlds Together. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about the Railroad versus the Sandbox. This is going to be more of a discussion geared towards DMs, though players, it's helpful to have players' points of view for this too, but the content of this really is for DMs to decide where to be in this spectrum. So what we're going to be discussing are kind of the pros and cons of each, and these are kind of the extremes of player freedom. So let's first kind of define what we're talking about. What we mean is with railroading, that's typically defined as kind of the DM forcing the players into a pre-scripted, predefined path. So the players can't really deviate from the story very much or go explore on their own. And then sandboxing is kind of, you give the players a world and let them do whatever they want, whenever they want. And there really is no pushing of a story anywhere. So there are... those are kind of the extremes of player freedom. And which one is right and which one is wrong? Well, that's hotly debated. And honestly, I think most people would agree that the answer is somewhere in the middle. So let's take a look at railroading first and kind of talk about that and the pros and cons of it and see what we can suss out about when it might be appropriate to use that. So if we look at railroading, first question, most people have this bad image of railroading as horrible. So railroading is, if you think kind of, older style adventure games, computer games, where you would have this quest that would lead you on a specific path and then would lead to another quest, which led to another quest, which led to another quest, and you couldn't get off of that path in the game. That's railroading, right? So when you're playing an RPG, part of the fun of an RPG is kind of exploring the world and the characters and making a story and getting involved in it. So it seems that railroading would just be bad in that environment. A lot of players, or a lot of people who are RPG players and DMs, also say railroading is bad in general, but is it always bad? So let's take a look at pros and cons, and then maybe we can answer that question. So some of the pros of railroading, because there are some. It helps newer players. All right, so when you're very new to playing RPGs, there's a lot of things that you're trying to learn mechanics wise. You're trying to learn what's a D20, what's a D10, what's a D4, what are these different classes and races, and oh my gosh, we're seeing some weird things. I don't know what these are, and what can I do in battle? So having to also think about a lot of freedom of story and exploration is a little difficult. It's something else you have to put in your brain, and it gets a bit intrusive maybe, or overwhelming for new players because they're trying to learn the mechanics. So in that case, if you've got a bunch of new players, railroading can be helpful to guide those players through the story so that they can concentrate on the rules that they need to learn for the next campaign, which will be a little more open for them. There are also times when you need to kind of guide players to something specific because it moves the story forward. You can get caught up in I just want to shop for 18 sessions. And the story's never going to get moved forward, and eventually most players are going to get bored. The DMs will certainly get bored. So at a certain point, you have to kind of corral the players without being too overbearing and strict about it. But it is, it's kind of a thing that is sometimes necessary. You've got to get the players steered back towards the story because, especially if you're doing a pre-written campaign or something, you got to end up in the general ballpark right at the end. And so you have to kind of guide them there. That doesn't mean that they can't go off the beaten path and explore extra things and have little side stories and stuff like that. But you do need to kind of get them back on the main path sometimes. It also can help pacing and excitement. You have to be careful here, though, because if you railroad too heavily and too often, players will get frustrated and it won't be exciting. It will just be frustrating. So you have to let them get off a little bit, but it's helpful to kind of keep, to use a little bit of railroading to kind of keep pacing of the story. Hey, Fairy Bard, how are you tonight? Thanks for coming and joining us. Railroading is easier to DM? ? I mean, is it really? Sometimes it is, and for some DMs it is. It's certainly easier from the standpoint of, tortilla soup. That sounds awesome. I just had a chicken sandwich from Culver's. Yours was better. You win. So for some DMs, it's going to be easier from a standpoint of you can have a bunch of pre-written stuff and you don't have to do as much on the fly thinking. If you're just going from quest to quest to quest and you know what's coming, you don't have to be as reactionary to it. And so from that standpoint, it's a little easier to DM. However, there are some drawbacks to that in that you don't give the players an opportunity to kind of help you build the story. And so you end up with more prep work a lot of times with this because you have to think through all the permutations and get everything laid out rather than let things flow with the players. So is it easier to DM? To a point, but not always. The cons: experienced players and storyteller type players like me will get really annoyed with that. If it's too heavy. Even though I'm a very story driven player and I like to help create the story and do the collaborative storytelling, I do like to have kind of points of interest, as it were, as a player to kind of guide me to, all right, we're going to build this story together, but it can't be completely random and open. We have kind of a storyline to get through, and then let's put some stuff on top of that. Hard to come up with all the possibilities of what the players might do, so you may have prepped A, B, C, and D, and they pick Y. That's absolutely true, especially me, because I'm kind of a dick. But, I'll do that just to mess with my DM sometimes, because I know where he wants me to go, and I'm just not going to do it. But yeah, it does get... it's hard to come up with all the possibilities, so when you do have to corral your players, they're going to feel railroaded unless you're really, really good at disguising that stuff, and that's really hard to do. I don't do it well, if at all. So it's not something that's easy to do. So also So it reduces the feelings of world exploration. And if you think about what an RPG is, it's role playing, right? It's not an adventure game, right? That has just quests that you go on one after another. It's not linear. It's meant to be, let's let the players explore what's around them and discover things. Which leads to another part, which it doesn't allow them to explore their characters very much. There are, like, we had one of the sessions recently in our campaign. We had a lot of fun with the different characters. The DM had come up with different kind of side stories or side quests for them that came off of some downtime that we had between main plot points in the campaign. And so we were running around the city and we were kind of, we had kind of grouped up these two players did this and I was off doing my thing, and then these other two players were secretly passing notes around. And we were kind of exploring our characters and what their motivations were and how they were going to interact with each other. And that was really fun. And we were able to do that because the DM didn't railroad us into, let's get to the next story point and this is all you can do. He just said, here's some notes from these guilds, and you got this note and you woke up to this and you got this psionic message in your head from something. And it was just really fun to be able to just go explore that stuff. And when you're railroading, it kind of inhibits players' agency, which it takes away their freedom. So but I want to go into this store that I saw and look at it because it looks kind of neat. Well, that's not really part of the thing. You got to get to the sewers, so we're going there. And so the door's locked. He's closed for lunch. But it's 3 PM, you said. Yeah, he takes lunch late. Whatever, let's go. That, I have no choices then. Because every door is locked at 3 PM because I'm trying to get to this sewer grate. Or the DM's trying to get me to the sewer grate, right? That's no fun for players. Let them go in the store and look around, roll on a random table and see if they find anything cool. Great. The very first session we had in this campaign, one of the things that has kind of become a recurring theme is my character, who is a gnome, so obviously constantly curious about stuff, saw this store with a purple awning on it and said, "Oh, purple, cool," and I ran off to the store while the party was on its way to something important. I just went, "Oh, store, purple, nice." So I went in the store, I talked to the guy, I looked around, and I found this cool little purple journal book and bought it, and I couldn't read it, and nobody in the party could read it. And so now I've been on kind of this quest to find somebody who can read this bloody book, and we still don't know what it's about. But I've got it, and it's, would have gotten your attention too. I mean, purple, right? And the funny thing with the DM was, really clever with that. Everything in the store was purple. So I was having a ball in there, and I was just looking all over the place. I was climbing up the shelves, because I'm 3 feet of pure beefcake, but I can't reach the tall shelves. I was getting the party members to look on the shelves for me, and I finally found this cool book, and I was like, all right, I can't read it, but I want it. And so now we've had, 4 sessions of doing stuff to advance the story, but there's this cool little side thing that came out of this freedom of exploration of, we're trying to figure out what this book says. Honestly, I don't think the DM knows what it says. Yeah. But, I'm having a lot of fun with my character. Everybody I meet, I'm like pulling out this book going, "Hey, by the way, do you have any idea what this is?" And I'm going into taverns, and I'm getting my character will get drunk and stand up on the bar and say, "Hey, does anybody know what this book says?" And hilarity ensues. So that if you don't have, if the DM is railroading people, you don't get to have cool little things like that enter into the campaign. So, you know, there's a lot of cons to this, and that's one of the reasons that people kind of, if you say railroading in an RPG context, everybody goes, ugh! It's not completely bad. I mean, if taken to the extreme, it really is. But there are times in campaigns where you really do need to kind of railroad your players, because you've got to get them somewhere on the path, right? You just got to be really careful with it. So let's take a look at the other extreme freedom, and look at the sandbox. So sandboxing, is it always good? Short answer, in my opinion, no. But let's talk about why. So some of the pros of and with sandboxing, what we're talking about is basically, all right, you're all in Underdark, go. And there's nothing. There's no stories. There's no hints. There's no hooks. There's, you know, just go. All right, that, you know, and that's an extreme example. I don't think I've ever seen or been part of anything close to that, but that's what we're talking about with complete sandboxing. So one of the pros with sandboxing is it gives players more investment in the story, because they're creating a lot of it. Right? It's not pre-created stuff. They're not being told this is the story and you're just kind of walking through it. They're helping to create it, and so they're more invested in it and more interested. Like the Purple Journal thing. That was not something that the DM had scripted. That was something that came out of a random roll, and now it's become a big part of the campaign and the story that's going on. So, we got to do that because of the sandboxing. It allows the players to explore what that's loud.
Oh.
It allows the players to explore what is what interests them. So, you know, if I'm interested in purple books, I could go find, you know, make my story about this purple book. Great. Or if I'm interested in exploring, you know, why my character has anger issues, well, I can go and explore that. If I'm interested in looking at, you know, I want to go into the ruins of something. I like exploring ruins. Well, we can go explore some ruins somewhere. And if the DM is paying attention, he'll say, okay, well, we've got this little side quest where you need to go look in these ruins for something, for this guild or something, you know. And that's what we were doing the past few sessions, is these little side quests of doing these neat little one-off things. So, you know, that allows people to stay in the story because they're doing things that are really interesting to them. And, you know, the DM has to balance that with, you know, everybody needs their turn with that kind of stuff. Or you can, like we've been doing the past couple of sessions, we kind of never split the party, but we split the party and we kind of jump back and forth. You know, let's talk about what you two are doing. Now let's talk about what you're doing. Now let's go back to you two. And, you know, so, and he's doing a real good job with kind of splitting that around. And then we all come back together after we've had our little side missions. Incidentally, that's been really good practice to learn how not to metagame, because when we come back together, our characters don't know what the players know, because we weren't there to hear all the stuff that we actually heard. So it's, you know, it's kind of good practice for that kind of thing too. Sandboxing allows the players to be more creative. So DMs get a lot of creativity time. You know, they get to build these elaborate stories. They get to play all these characters, not just one. So they get a lot of creative outlet with that. Well, players like to be creative too. So if you give them this sandboxy type feeling, they feel more in tune with the game and what they're doing, and they get more satisfaction from being able to be creative. D&D players are not typically uncreative people. They don't get into it just to roll dice. I mean, rolling dice is fun, but you're not doing it to be an engineer. You're doing it to have some creative fun, right? So you want to give them the freedom to be creative. And it makes it easier to prep for a session? Question mark? Maybe? I don't know. It does in so much as you don't have to think through all the permutations up front. Now, what that does mean is you need to be more aware of the broader world that you're putting your sandbox in, so that you can have consistent reactions to different things that the players do. Otherwise, they'll just get confused. So, prepping a particular session is probably easier. Prepping the campaign as a whole, I think, is a little more involved at that point. Because you have to have a lot of knowledge around the players. So, I mean, yeah, kinda. I think it balances out in the end. You know, prepping the campaign versus prepping each session. The total amount of time for the DM is probably a wash at the end, but I think the sandboxing allows you to do more stuff up front and less stuff each session. All right, so let's talk about the cons of sandboxing, because there are some, and we've run into them. It can be confusing for new players. It actually can be confusing for experienced players. One of the issues we ran into in our current campaign is we had done some, the beginning was kind of a bit of a scripted, not railroady, but I mean, there was some scripted stuff there. And when we got to the end of that little bit, we didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. It was basically, you're in the city, now what are you going to do? Well, we were used to more scripted stuff, and we were waiting for a hook or a hint or a something, and we spent quite a bit of time just wandering around not knowing what to do. So if you're going to sandbox, if you're going to put the players in a sandbox environment, you have to let them know that they're going into a sandbox environment. And so the DM, I mean, he realized that he had not quite done that right, and so he talked to us after the stream and said, okay, this part is just kind of sandbox, there's no scripting, so we're just going to go through and kind of riff on some things and find fun stuff to do. So, and for new players who are still trying to learn mechanics and which one's the D10 and which one's the D8, they can get confused because they don't have enough brain, people don't have enough brain power to think about all the mechanics of D&D, which are a lot, as well as all the story. Yeah, and it can get overwhelming for new players because, they're still trying to learn how spells work and what things to roll and what's a skill check and what's an opposed check and what actions can I do in combat. They're still working mechanics, trying to learn the rules, so they can't think that much about story. Now, it's different if you have a mixed group because the experienced players can kind of take on some of that burden for the new players and help guide them through. But if you've got all new players, sandboxing is often a pretty bad idea. You need to kind of lead them through some things for their first campaign to get them just used to playing. Sandboxing can be really frustrating for story building DMs. Now, a lot of people would say, well, tough. It's, the game is not for the DMs. True. However, it's as much for the DMs as it is for the players. I mean, everybody at the table should be having fun, including the DM. If the DM is not having fun, you won't have a DM for very long. They're not getting paid to do it. Well, maybe Matt Mercer is, but you know, most of them aren't. So they're not going to do something that they're not having fun with forever, right? Now, that being said, if you're going to be a DM, you need to understand that everything that you write is not necessarily going to make it to the table. And you just have to be okay with that. But I do know that it can be frustrating. You got this really cool encounter planned for tonight, and the players never get there because they went way off into left field. And dang it, I had all these minis prepped, I had this terrain done, I had all this cool story outlined and all this stuff, and they never got there. And they're never gonna get there. They just completely bypassed it, so this stuff is never gonna make it to the table. First of all, never say never, because you can rework it and put it further up the storyline. But yes, that can be frustrating. What I would say is, don't spend quite that much time prepping an encounter, because you have to figure that 90% of the stuff you prep ain't going to make it tonight. It's just the way it is. Sandboxing can cause campaigns to drag on forever. If you spend 20 sessions shopping in the city, you're never going to move the story forward. So if you give the players too much sandbox, they're never going to get anywhere. They'll just keep running around in the sandbox. So you have to guide them a little bit. I mean, you have to give them some kind of path to follow at points. Now, you can give a session or two where to just go nuts, knock yourself out, do whatever you want to do, think of something fun. I would caution you against doing that with players who aren't A, kind of experienced, and B, storytelling type players that want to do that. There are some players that don't want to do that. They don't want to have an open sandbox. They like to explore and go a little off the path, but they don't want you to just throw them in a city and say go. You know, some players love it, some don't. So you kind of got to know your players. And sandboxing is harder to DM ? Again, that's one of those things where, yeah, you don't have the scripted story, so you got to do a lot more thinking on your feet and really paying attention to what the players say and do so that you can react to it and kind of build the story as you go. But much less prepping and planning that way if you're good at thinking on your feet. Now, there is still a lot of prepping and planning up front, as we discussed earlier, in that you got to know your world so that you can be consistent with your responses to the players. And we're talking about campaigns here, not one-offs. One-offs are a completely different animal. One-offs are usually pretty scripted because you've only got a certain amount of time to get them from beginning to end. You can't let them go off complete sandbox on those because you just don't have the time for it. So, it can be a little harder to DM. For me, it's more fun to DM things like that because you get to be spur of the moment creative with the players and tell the stories collaboratively on the fly rather than having to prep all the stories ahead of time on your own. And I love world building. I love, I'm doing the Worlds Together Builder stuff, and I love doing that. But I also really like, coming up with stuff on the fly and interacting with the players and seeing what we build together. So is it harder? Depends on how you DM and how you think about storytelling, and what kind of storyteller you are. Is it more fun? Is for me, but for some people it's not. Again, depends on how you think about it. So that is the extremes of player freedom from a DM's point of view, the railroad and the sandbox. Now, which one is right? There's a lot of things you have to think about. A, the level of your players. If they're really new players, you want to skew more towards the railroading than the sandboxing, because they don't have the capacity to learn all the rules and make a story at the same time. They need the story kind of fed to them so they can concentrate on the mechanics. Experienced players are going to want to skew more towards the other end of the spectrum and get more freedom for exploration. So not only the level of your player, but the types of players you have. If you're playing with somebody like me, I'm going to want more sandbox than railroad. That doesn't mean I want you to just throw me in a city and say, knock yourself out. I do want some story and some hooks, but I want a lot of freedom to explore and create and stuff like that. Whereas there are many players who, you know, like World of Warcraft. I've got this quest, I gotta go here, I gotta go here. Sure, I can go look at these mountains a little bit, but really I'm just going from quest to quest to quest. There are players that like, I mean, World of Warcraft is really popular. That's how it works, and there's a reason it's really popular. A lot of people like that kind of take me by the hand and lead me on adventure. Don't make me think about it. So, man, I can't see. Big old smudge. So you gotta, as a DM, you really have to know the level of your players and the amount of storytelling they like to do and the creativity level. So what else do you have to think about when you're railroading versus sandboxing? Well, so one thing is, as I mentioned before, is it a campaign or is it a one-off? If it's a one-off, you're going to have to be more railroady because you've got a limited amount of time. If it's a campaign that you've got no specific time limit for because you're not doing a TV series or something, you know, you don't have to worry about, okay, they've gotten off script tonight. Well, we can get to this point 2 sessions from now. It doesn't matter if it's tonight or 2 weeks from now. We'll get there eventually. Let them have some fun, right? So you can skew more to the sandbox. Now, do I ever think that you should go completely one side or the other? No, not ever, never. You can get closer to one side or the other, but I don't think you should ever go to one of these extremes, regardless of what level or types of players you have. Because there are some things you have to consider with what an RPG is. The whole point of Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade or any other RPG is a group of people sitting around a table having fun. And in order for the DM to facilitate that, they need to understand how their players have fun. They also need to understand how they have fun. And it's a good idea to get with players, a group of players that are fairly like-minded in how they have fun. Doesn't mean they don't have to all think exactly alike. They don't have to be all at the same skill level. But they generally have to be somewhere in the same spectrum of whether they like guided adventure or open adventure. Because if half of your table likes guided adventure and half of your table likes really open adventure, then half of your table is going to not be having fun at any given point, right? And that's not what we want at all. What we want is for everybody to be having fun all the time. So that's probably impossible to achieve, but the closer you get to that, the more fun you're going to have as a DM, because everybody's going to be laughing and telling stories. And when you know this is working is when You meet up with your players for the next session, and they're talking with each other about, oh, remember last session when we did this, or when he did that, or when this happened. Or when you've got things like my kids from the last campaign, they're constantly telling stories about the stuff they did all throughout the campaign. So when you get stuff like that, you know that you're achieving the goal, because people are paying attention to the story and getting really invested. So, chat, you haven't been talking very much, so let's see what you think about where you like to be on the spectrum between guided adventure and open adventure. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you like to DM it? As a DM, what are your preferences for this? Somewhere in the middle? Yeah. Because personally, I'm more towards the sandbox side, but I do need some story hook from the DM, at least. And I don't mind the occasional kind of scripted thing, lead me from here to quest to quest to quest. But so do you, all right, a few options of story hooks and be able to pick which one in what order. Yeah, I mean, that's good. And I know a lot of really experienced players that like that. Right, just have a little side adventure. So you like being able to say, ooh, shop with a purple awning, I'm going in there. And not have the DM say, well, I'm so sorry, the door is locked. Yeah, I mean, why would a DM ever tell you a shop had a purple awning if he wasn't going to let you go in it, right? That's just dumb on the part of the DM if they did that. So yeah, I mean, that you can't have a purple store and not allow players to go in. That's goofy. So what for those of you who have DM'd before, which of these do you like? Or if you haven't DM'd and you're thinking about DMing, which way do you think you would be more comfortable with as a DM? I mean, I think you guys know my thoughts on it and where I'm comfortable with it, because I've talked about it ad nauseum and I never shut up. Thinking about it? Are there things that are holding you back from it? Or just haven't had time to get there yet? Good with story and backgrounds and characters? Well, see, okay, so I think you'd actually be a rather good DM then, because there are enough tools that you don't really need to balance encounters. They'll balance them for you. If you can keep the story, and really one of the secrets of DMing is fudge it and just make the story good. So, we've run into plenty of unbalanced encounters where the DM will just Deus Ex Machina the thing, all of a sudden some awesome guy comes in and saves us from nowhere, pops out of the back of the warehouse and whips the last two guys with the sword that we haven't been able to beat, because we were about to party wipe. So, he didn't want that to happen. So, oh yeah. Oh, running away is a lot of times an option. Also, DMs need to be unafraid of killing characters. That's a thing. Yeah, it is a bummer, but man. And I've DM'd some things where I purposefully have made it so that the only viable option was die or run. If you want to re-roll a character, stick around. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes players can just do completely stupid things. But I have actually set up encounters because I wanted the players to run and face just completely impossible odds and start having to make those character decisions about how am I going to deal with this. Because I think it's just a fun kind of social experiment to do things like that to the players. And, railroading players, one of the things about sandboxing is if you're going to let them sandbox, you have to be prepared, and they have to be prepared for the consequences of their actions, which means they could die. That character could die. They might re-roll a character. It could happen. And if you're afraid of that, then there's no tension in the game. There's no tension for the characters, because if the character is thinking I've got, I'm too important to kill off, and they know they're never going to die, they don't care what they do, because they think the DM's just going to run and save them with something somehow. That goes away as soon as you actually kill a character. Nobody else starts thinking that. Now, I'm not saying you should go kill characters every campaign, but don't be afraid to if the story calls for it. And if the players are doing completely stupid, reckless things, they have to have consequences for those, right? If they're going to sandbox, yeah, you might die. Right, like run into a dragon's lair at first level by themselves. Bye. Had fun. Roll up a new character. So, and it can be kind of fun to, for characters to die, especially if they're doing something heroic, like they sacrifice themselves to save the party, or and they become a legend in the city or in the world, and then in another campaign they're brought back as some kind of legend or saint or hero that people look up to, and there's statues of them and all that kind of stuff. It can actually be pretty fun to have your character die, and as a DM it can bring a lot of, the bards sing about them. It can bring a lot of storytelling for future things. So, I mean, don't be afraid of that. And that's really kind of the sandbox environment, where the DMs and the players really have to think on their feet to be consistent about their story and to make it interesting and fun. On the railroad side of it, you don't have to think about that, because if I'm going to kill a character and I'm railroading them, I've thought ahead about this is when the character dies, and I don't care what he does or how well he rolls, he's going to die. That, to me, as a player and a DM, that sucks. That's no fun, right? If I'm saying, well, at 5th level, your character's going to die, you don't know it yet, but that's what's going to happen, it takes the fun out of it for me as a DM, even. Unless I'm a sadistic jerk, but I just don't see that as fun. But I have no fear of, if we get closer to the sandbox thing and they're doing stupid stuff, hey, consequences for actions. Right, it shouldn't be the goal of the DM. We did have my younger daughter. She had started playing the kids campaign. She had started that. She wanted to try D&D. It turns out that she didn't have the attention span for the 2-hour sessions, 2.5 hour sessions. So after 6 or 7 sessions, she wanted out of the game, right? So she and the DM worked on, well, your character's going to, in the next session, your character will sacrifice themselves for the good of the party, and then you'll be out, and maybe you can come back as a guest spot or something like that, as a ghost. So, I mean, they killed her character on purpose, and it was part of the story, and it was pre-worked out, and, you know, everybody was happy about it. Those are about the only times that you should plan to kill a character, I think. But, you know, don't be afraid to do it. Especially if you've got a really good character that's much loved, and the player's treating them like they're invincible. Yeah, see, party kills are not... It's just not fun for anybody. I mean, I could kill a party. You could have 6 level 20s, professional players. I could wipe them out in a half a second. I mean, that's no fun for anybody. What's the challenge? And what's the point? Just come to the table and say you're dead. I mean, the DM's God, right? Yeah, I mean, just avoid those. I can't imagine how they would be DMs and get anybody to play with them if that was their goal. Unless they were just being stupid for the con or something, but... in which case, that's kind of dumb. Yeah, there's no way to win. I mean... yeah, I just spent an hour and a half rolling up this character. I come sit it down on the table and I'm immediately dead. What fun. Hooray. That's the kind of sandbox I like. Sandbox of death. So, hey, takes all kinds. But, yeah, and I'm sure that there were a lot of people avoiding those kind of DMs. When that kind of information gets out, it's, I mean, who wants to play with them, right? Who would? So if you're going to DM, don't be sadistic. Don't be afraid to put tension in the game. You want them to be afraid of death. That way they'll have to make decisions about, well, you know, if I go jumping at this thing with my sword, I might die. So maybe I don't want to do something stupid like that. Or maybe I do, because I'm a little gnome barbarian that's 3 feet of beefcake and not very smart. But, you know, that's a different story. So, anyway, there's a lot of ways you can go with this stuff. And it is, it's a very fine balancing act as a DM to know how much of each of these things to put into the campaign at any given time, because there are going to be different times where you need to slide this scale back and forth. Even with the same players, even with very experienced players, you have to be able to give them some guidance at some points and direct them in a way that will lead them eventually to the end goal. Now, how good you are at that, at disguising that from being railroady, it has a lot to do with experience as a DM. And knowing how to gently goad them into making the decisions you want them to make while they still feel like it's decisions that they made. And a good way to do that is by getting into the habit of, when they're talking things out, do things that they talk about, even though that's not scripted. Then they start feeling like they're making a whole lot of the decisions. Oh, homebrew for your family. Cool. How many players are you going to have? Okay, so sandbox style video games like Minecraft and stuff like that, or like sandbox type adventure games like Skyrim, open world, or more like I can build anything anywhere. So 6 or 7 players and a DM ish. That's pretty good size. That's really nice. Okay, Skyrim Dead Stranding. So, I mean, that's a really good... Skyrim is a really good example of how a good campaign can run, because there's a lot of world there that's laid out, that is explained, that has a lot of history. There are tons of quests, and there's like a main quest line, but you don't have to follow it in any certain I mean, the main quest line has to go from quest to quest, but you don't have to follow the main quest line the whole time. You can go off and do all these things for days and days and days, and then come back and do a main quest thing, and then go off and do something else for days and days and days. They're really, really good at open worlding and having things as far to the sandbox level as they can, but still getting you to the end goals. Skyrim, in fact, is one of the best examples I can think of doing that well. So if you've never played Skyrim, I would highly suggest taking a look at it, or might I suggest checking out our YouTube channel, where Wind and Fire plays Skyrim every week. We've got lots of videos for that. Yeah, Morrowind. And they were, the older ones were really good at open worlding, but Skyrim has just, I think, nailed it. Yeah, Skyrim has just absolutely nailed that concept and the balance of it. So they have a bunch of scripted little stories that all kind of feed into the main storyline and are related, because the whole world is thought out and the whole world is interconnected. So they've done a real good job of bringing that out. And as a DM, if you're going to get to that kind of sandboxy stuff and open world, which I think should be a goal, you really have to lay your world out and really know your world so that you can react appropriately and consistently with the players. Yeah, that's another good thing they've done is, they've got all these kinds of quests. It's not always take this stuff to this guy or go fight these things in this dungeon. They have lots of different types of things that you need to do, and that's really cool. And they've even gone so far as where you can adopt kids and bring them presents and build a house, and there's all kinds of things you can do. You can become the heads of all these different types of guilds. Yeah, or just wander, not even a quest, just wander into something really cool. Wind and Fire does that all the time. Wanders around, and she loves that. Just wandering around exploring. Yeah, you can, in that game you can become a vampire, you could become a werewolf, you can, there's all kinds of things that you can do and explore. Yet you still will, if you play the game enough, you still will eventually get to the end of the main quest line. And you're still going back and being kind of goaded to go back and do the main quest line things once in a while. So they've done a very, very good job of exactly what we're talking about here, which is getting towards the sandbox, but still getting you to the end goal. Now, how long it takes you to get there is up to you. But that's really the kind of freedom that we're looking to have in the RPG and the tabletop RPGs. So yeah, I mean, if that's the kind of DMing that you want to do, that is a really good way to learn how to do that stuff, is watch gameplay of that game or play it yourself. If you're a gamer, and that's a really good example of how to craft a campaign that'll do that. So as a bonus tonight, I just wanted to let you all know I ran across something today that I thought would be very interesting for people who enjoy world building, and that is this world building magazine. I didn't know such a thing existed. But you can sign up for free, get on their mailing list, or you can just go and check out back issues and stuff. I've read a couple articles. I haven't had much time to get through it, but they've been really interesting so far. I have enjoyed it, and I'm planning on going through quite a lot of these. Apparently, they've been around for a couple of years. I think their volume 1 has started in like 2017. So, just thought I'd pass that on because it looked interesting. It's been interesting to me. And, you know, free stuff is good stuff. So, hey, go check it out and see what they got. I mean, I've got nothing to do with this. I just happened to run across it today and thought y'all might like to see it. So, so there you go. Happy world building for that. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that stream. I thank you for hanging out and talking to me. I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas and a great week. I will be back next week. Hey, Fairy Bard, if you don't mind, if you've seen some neat, free, cool things, throw them up on our Facebook, and I will talk about them next week. If you have a sec and wouldn't mind. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. This is a fun thing to kind of talk about and explore, I think. Still working on some more Worlds Together Builders. The show that's on YouTube, the little 20-minute snippets where I'm going through and doing the map making and the article writing and building the characters and all that stuff. So there's more of that coming. If you haven't checked that out, I invite you to go check that out. I think you'll have fun with it. The first 4 episodes are all about map making, and we make a map and do some other cool things. And I just started to record this morning doing some of the articles and fleshing out some of the characters and stuff. So we're having a lot of fun there. So look for that coming soon. The schedule's been a little squirrely because of the holidays and stuff, but I'll get on top of it. Don't worry. Anyway, if you enjoyed that and want to see more and want to support this channel, the best way to do that is to tell your friends and bring them along for the discussion. If you don't have any friends, just give us a follow and I'll be your friend. If you have a subscription that you'd like to give somebody, we would love to take it. If you want to know what's going on when we're doing it, make sure you follow us, mash all the buttons, ding all the bells on all the social media channels, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Until next time, build on.